Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawati Hami. As the situation in Gaza, owing to indiscriminate bombardment by the Israeli troops, worsens, the United Nations Security Council is expected to vote on a resolution calling for an urgent and sustainable cessation of hostilities. Earlier, we know the United Nations Security Council has failed in order to reach a consensus regarding a sustainable ceasefire in Gaza. And it had been vetoed by the United States of America, of course. On the other hand, we also saw a major development happening at the United Nations General Assembly, which had adopted a resolution overwhelmingly with the votes which were voted in favor of a humanitarian ceasefire over there, with the members 153 voting in favor of that particular resolution. Now, given that fact, now this particular vote which is going to take place at the United Nations Security Council, what are the expectations of this particular vote? Is it going to be adopted unanimously, or is it going to meet the similar sort of a fate as earlier resolutions regarding the situation in Gaza at the United Nations Security Council had been faced with? Now, also that particular resolution, the United Nations General Assembly resolution, what does that underscore? What is the significance of that? And what sort of binding effect does it have or carry with itself? We'll be discussing this particular thing also. We have seen the kind of statements coming from the US administration earlier by US President Joe Biden, warning Israel that it was risking to lose international support because of its indiscriminate fighting in the besieged Gaza Strip. Now, we have seen a statement that has come forth by the Secretary of Defense of the United States of America. We'll definitely take the analysis regarding that particular statement also. On the other hand, we have seen Human Rights Watch in a statement has said, let me quote, Israel is deliberately depriving Palestinians of access to food, water, and other basic necessities. The use of hunger against the population is a war crime, and it is called upon the world leaders to act. Now, we'll also talk about this particular warning that has been made by Human Rights Watch in today's show. For that, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Aniq Zafar. He happens to be an analyst. Mr. Zafar, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. At the same time, on Skype, we are being joined by Lieutenant General retired Raza Mohammed Khan, former president of the National Defense University. General Khan, thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. Mr. Zafar, if you allow me, let me begin the discussion with General Khan. General Khan, now we've seen efforts since this particular war began, or the onslaught, if we put it the right way, the one-sided, indiscriminate and disproportionate bombardment by Israel on the innocent Palestinians in Gaza. There have been a number of strides at the United Nations Security Council as well as the United Nations General Assembly. There is a difference that we can clearly see as to what has happened at the United Nations Security Council earlier, with all different sort of a scenario happening at the United Nations General Assembly. What reasons come to your mind as to why this difference exists over there between these two top organs of the United Nations?
Okay, Bismillah. In the UN system, the resolution passed by the Security Council are some of them, if they are passed under Chapter 6 of the UN Charter, then they are not binding. But if they are passed under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, then they are binding. Unfortunately, all resolutions passed by the General Assembly are non-binding, except one which was related to the US invasion of Korea, in which a similar situation had happened, that all the issue was again and again vetoed by the Soviet Union. It did not want to allow the United States or its partners to attack North Korea. But then the similar resolution was passed by the General Assembly with 3/4 majority, and that was then taken as a basis of international action against North Korea. So I think that there is still a possibility for that to happen, but we'll have to wait and see. You made a mention of the likely outcome of the present meeting of the UN Security Council. I think all the members, particularly the veto holding members, need to realize that Israel cannot win the war in Gaza for a number of reasons. Because if you compare it, what happened in 1967, and that was a 6-day war. Yes, they won that. And in 1973, again, that was kind of a draw, although that took the West Bank and the Golan Heights and other places. But this war has raged for more than 2.5 months. And I think Israel has exhausted most of its weapons, equipment, and its stamina, according to many reports, is now dwindling. And the Israeli armed forces reputation, along the reputation of all the 5 permanent members of the Security Council and their countries, I think their reputation is being spoiled. And more than that, I think the kind of atrocities, the kind of war crimes, the kind of genocide which the world is seeing is actually tantamount to something that could actually have disastrous consequences for the entire Middle East, the entire world. And therefore, we hope that this time there should be a consensus, at least, on a ceasefire, even if it is temporary. Eventually, one should hope that
Right.
they again revive the two-state solution.
Right.
And if that is done, I think all this fighting will end in Gaza, not only in Gaza, but
Right, General Khan,
this.
you mentioned very important things. Now, when it comes to the approach of the United States administration that is in power at the moment, what is expected when this particular vote happens at the United Nations Security Council? Earlier, we have seen the kind of approach this administration has carried forward when it comes to the situation in Gaza at the United Nations Security Council. I'll come back to you for your detailed view regarding as to what is expected of the United States this time around. Mr. Aniq, Zafar, what is expected when it comes to the situation in a particular territory where there is aggression that is unfolding over the last over 2 months, and the kind of proportion, the scale of the damage and destruction that has been caused by that. Now, when we see the approach by majority of the members, overwhelming majority, 153 out of 193 at the United Nations General Assembly, with only 10 going against that particular resolution. At the United Nations Security Council, we see any sort of a resolution calling for a ceasefire being vetoed by one of the P5. Why there is such a stark difference in the approaches of 2 permanent organs of the United Nations?
Well, as you may be aware, that United Nations General Assembly is not as powerful as the Security Council is, as rightly pointed out by the Honorable General, that the resolutions of the General Assembly are not as such binding. And even in the Security Council, the resolutions passed under a particular section of the United Nations Charter are binding. So it comes to the moral standing of so many actors in this conflict, that how they are behaving and how the world is viewing their conduct, and on what moral parameters they are allowing the rest of the world to judge them. For example, for the US, it is very obvious right now that if US today says that Israel must stop, Israel will stop. So in this context, I think the only power right now that matters is US. What US has all along been trying to do has been trying to limit the conflict so that Israel does not become bogged down with a conflict which expands over the region, because that will become unmanageable for Israel and US. The US has very successfully so far allowed the successfully managed it in a manner that it did not expand beyond Israel. Now we hear a few stories about Yemeni Houthis getting a bit involved in it. In the Red Sea, they are creating some problems. There are now threats to shipping lines and shipping routes. So that may create another dynamic if it escalates. But so far, US has managed to keep the cost low for Israel. There has been a higher cost as opposed to previous wars, because in previous wars Israel was not engaged for more than 2.5
when you talk
months,
about the United States of America keeping the cost lower for Israel this time around as compared to in the past. Now, in what terms that cost?
No, not in the past. I said that if the conflict had escalated, the cost would have gone so high that Israel and US would not have been able to manage it. But since they have localized the conflict so far, we can see that neither Hezbollah in Lebanon nor any other country has got involved into it, right? And Israel is only between Israel and Gazans. It actually has not expanded as such to the West Bank in that sense. It's only Hamas and Gaza and
okay. So when you
so that is why it is still localized. But despite that, as rightly pointed out by General Saab, despite that, Israel has not been able to wind it up. And one of the major problem with Israel is that when it started the war, it was not very clear that what is its end objective. Whatever its end objectives, those are not being achieved. And I was reading through some of the coverage today, and some of the UN observers have pointed out that there will be weeks and weeks before we will see end of hostilities in the normal course of this war. But it's only the moral pressure of the world, and somehow if the world is able to convince US that it has to bear down on Israel now to stop and cede, stop aggression, announce a ceasefire, allow aid to come in.
Basically, what I understand from your take is that the United States has been able successfully to contain this particular conflict to a certain limited territory, not letting it go beyond that particular border into the wider region. So that's what you say, that it didn't cost much for Israel in that sense. So when it comes to the kind
in
of
comparative terms,
so when it comes to the sentiment of the international community, isn't that the cost when 153 members vote overwhelmingly in favor of a resolution, even those members which in an earlier vote perhaps were on the other side, this time around in this particular vote they had voted for a ceasefire. I'll come back to you to take your detailed view regarding this, about the international sentiment that is shifting against Israel, and US perhaps facing isolation on that particular front. For now, we are honored to have been joined by the participant in the show, Dr. Manzoor Afridi, foreign affairs expert. Dr. Afridi, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. Now, as we see the situation in Gaza worsens with every single passing day, there have been a lot of strides at the United Nations Security Council, also the kind of overwhelming vote for a ceasefire at the United Nations General Assembly. Now, today, there is an expected vote at the United Nations Security Council. Do you think the result or the outcome of this particular vote at the United Nations Security Council could be different from those votes which have already been held at the United Nations Security Council?
Well, this is very much a relevant question. What I see that it was a so prolonged conflict, and the Israelis, they were allowed to have this barbarism and genocide of the innocent Palestinians. But now, if we see such kind of move from the big powers, and especially from all the members of the United Nations who voted in favor of ceasefire from the floor of the General Assembly, so it shows that the world community that is very much focused and dedicated towards this ceasefire and also to have an everlasting peace on this Palestinian land. But as far as the question of the UN Security Council is concerned, so there can be a change in this regard because the big powers, especially if we see United States, France, and UK, they have on the same page, and even it was a voice from international community, and they were demanding to have a ceasefire at an earlier stage of this conflict when it was escalated from 7th October. So, but despite of that voice and despite of so much concern from the human rights organizations and even from the UN members, it could not stop. And even the big powers, they vetoed it. And clearly, it was showing that there was the U.S. interest on the back of Israel. There was a U.S. So now we hope and we want to have an everlasting peace, and the UN Security Council, it must be on the same page with the General Assembly. But anything can happen because international relations that is based on interest, and where there is interest, so of course the decision will be molded and that will be in that direction. So the United Nations Security Council, the permanent members, especially what I mentioned, those states, they can play a pivotal role in this regard. So we have to wait and see what direction it takes, and it not necessarily to have the same decision what the General Assembly has taken and an overwhelming majority. It can be, every state of the permanent members, they have to look for the bilateral relations with Israel as well. So it is very much unfortunate that whenever there is a question of collective security, or even if there is cause of humanity, so every time the bilateral relationship that comes forward in the way where such kind of brutalities that are allowed to continue. And we have seen that so much the indiscriminate policies from the big powers and from the Israel, how they have targeted all the civilian populations, hospitals, ambulances, and even food supply that was not allowed to convey and to have reached to the innocent Palestinians. So in this regard, we have to wait for the decision of the UN Security Council. And if we see the previous record, even from the escalation of this conflict this year, so even before that, for so many years and for so many decades, it has been a common practice within the permanent members of the UNSC that 1, 2, or 3 members, they have often vetoed the resolution for ceasefire in favor of Israel. So we hope so, but we should not too much be
Dr.
certain
Afridi, your point is
about
well taken. I seek your pardon for the interjection over here. Your point is well taken. Now, when we talk about that earlier resolution that was adopted at the United Nations General Assembly, there is a general perception as a matter of rule also according to the UN Charter when it comes to the binding effect legally of a certain resolution from either of the two permanent organs of the United Nations, whether it be the United Nations Security Council and the United Nations General Assembly. It happens to be the United Nations Security Council with those resolutions having a binding effect according to Chapter 7 of it. Now, when we talk about this particular specific vote that was passed at the United Nations General Assembly after the invocation of Article 99 by the United Nations Secretary General, does this particular vote also take that binding effect? And if yes, what sort of measures can be put in place by the United Nations in order to implement that resolution?
I think now the UN members, all the General Assembly members, they have to look for the consequences. So if consequences that can be multifolded and many-folded and future, that it can threat the situation in Middle East more even to other countries, and for the vital interests of all these major powers, then yes, the UN Secretary General can come forward and then reconsider it, and then yes, UN Security Council also can have its move towards towards the ceasefire or towards a peace, whether that is positive peace or negative peace. So a negative peace that is in between the two wars. So even negative peace that is also very much the need of the hour. So then in this regard, yes, it's possible, because in so many occasions we have seen even in African states, in Sudan and Liberia and Central African Republic, in previous times, in earlier when there was a move towards the UN peacekeeping operations, and for the ceasefires when there were civil wars in these African states. So it happened. So in this regard, it's possible, there is possibility, and I think what matters, the UN Security Council permanent members, they matter in this regard too much. On the one side, if there is Russia and China, but on the other side, the France, UK, and United States, they are more important in this regard. So if it escalates the situation into more tense situation in future, and if it can threat the vital interests of the big powers, then yes, it can be a binding principle on all the members of the United Nations.
Dr. Manzoor Afridi, foreign affairs expert, thank you very much for joining us on Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. General Khan, now, as you had already mentioned now, during the course of discussion, Mr. Aniq Zafar is of the view the United States has been successfully able to keep the cost for Israel low in terms that this particular conflict didn't go into the wider region. Do you agree? Or what's your understanding regarding that? And also that particular question when it comes to the vote today at the United Nations Security Council, and after that overwhelming majority, that vote which got in the United Nations General Assembly, is it expected that the United States is going to have a different sort of an approach and a position in today's UNSC vote?
First of all, I think I'd like to respond to one of your queries about why the United States is so constantly and persistently siding with Israel. I think the reason lies in religious matters, and there are a very large number of Zionist Christians who believe in the end times, and for that it is the US policy to irrevocably and irreversibly committed to the defense of Israel. But then that's a separate issue. Now, coming to the cost, I think first I'd like to talk about the cost to the United States itself. And I talked about the cost to its reputation. I would like to also talk about its efforts, to bring in people in its own support through the Abraham Accords, which included many countries from the UAE and the Middle East, and the Abraham Accords too were to come into effect, by some kind of a rapprochement between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And if you recall, when President Biden was there in India, so they talked of a corridor between Israel, the UAE, and India, and that was actually to scuttle the Chinese BRI. So all those efforts now have become impossible. So that has probably caused a lot of diplomatic, economic, and political cost to the United States itself. That needs to be. I'm sure the U.S. leadership is considering that, and that is one reason why the U.S. Defense Secretary is visiting Israel and the Middle East for this purpose. Also, I mean, the cost to the Israel.
General Khan, I'll hold you for a second over here. As you yourself have mentioned, the kind of statement that has come forth by the Secretary of Defense, General Lloyd Austin, that the lesson, I mean, he has got the criticism on the statements he has made. What's your understanding? What does that depict is there no unanimity of the understanding when it comes to the policy of the US administration towards Israel at this particular point in history? Or does this particular statement by General Lloyd Austin depict actually?
I think that there may be, political motives behind that, because Mr. Netanyahu had declared initially that he wants to destroy Hamas, which, as I said earlier, he cannot do it. And even after 2.5 months, he has not done it. So he will not be able to do it again. And the Israeli infantry is suffering a lot of losses in this tunnel warfare. And he had also said that he is going to keep Gaza indefinitely under Israeli control. That again has been, I think, objective too by the United States. The US Secretary of Defense is there to tell Israel that there is a certain limit to which the United States can support Israel, and nothing beyond that. But it is also quite possible that there is some kind of a temporary ceasefire, again to give more time to Israel, to reconsider its strategy, and also to regain balance, and to logistically again make itself more self-sufficient, either through the help of the United States wherewithal, which is located in Europe, and particularly the weapons for the Israeli Air Force, which are dwindling very fast. So there could be multiple reasons for that. And this visit is also to prevent, a bigger sort of expansion or escalation of the conflict, where some Middle Eastern countries can actively jump in, which could include Iran, and which could include, others from Lebanon, which could be, which could make it very difficult, more difficult for Israel to regain balance. And we know that Hezbollah has a strength of more than 100,000 fighters. They are all, hardened and trained fighters. And if there is an effort which opens up from there, then I think Israel will become most vulnerable. And I think probably, Israel's defeat would become very visible. So I think the United States is trying that does not happen. And therefore, in my view, I think the present UN Security Council decision will be vital, and I hope they consider all these aspects before they commit one way or the other.
Right, General Khan, now, as you already mentioned, the resources and the stamina of the Israeli troops dwindling. And you also mentioned that this particular visit by the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, is perhaps aimed at making Israel realize that. Now, if the stamina and the resources are dwindling, shouldn't naturally there be a realization among the ranks of the top leadership of Israel, especially given the fact now we've seen the calls coming from the opposition also for the Prime Minister Netanyahu to resign, that he has himself lost that confidence and trust primarily of among the people within Israel?
There are actually two very clear indications. And the first one, it flowed out from the mistaken killing of 3 Israeli hostages, only I think 2 days back, by the Israeli security forces. And that has, there's a big backlash there. And people have gathered there in the Israeli capital, and they were demonstrating. And I think that is going to have a lot of effect. And people are demanding that the government of Israel should agree to holding talks for the release of hostages first. And for that, it is essential that there is a ceasefire. Secondly, and more importantly, is the feeling of the dual citizens of Israel, who are Jews, but who are not only Israeli citizens, but the citizens of the US and the P5 and many other countries of the world who are actually now leaving, they're departing Israel, and they're very influential people. These are the people, you know, who are very rich people, and they've been contributing to the economy of Israel, and they have started feeling insecure. And if they start, leaving in hordes, then I think that will be an
Right.
even more threat to the stability of Israel itself. So all these are pressures now which are building upon Mr. Netanyahu and his present government.
Right.
And I think if the national interest of Israel are kept by him, paramount, then his own, staying in power, then I think he must immediately agree to a ceasefire and
Right.
then even eventually to a two-state solution, which the whole world is now talking about.
Right. Let me once again proceed to Mr. Zafar. Mr. Zafar, now, as you already mentioned, the cost in terms of that it didn't go into a wider region, right? So, as General Khan has also mentioned, we see the kind of isolation in the United States itself by the kind of the vote at the United Nations General Assembly, also the kind of statements now we see already the US President Joe Biden warning Israel that it risks losing the international support because of its indiscriminate fire. Now, the kind of statement that has come from Mr. Lloyd Austin, also Ben Wallace, a former defense secretary, they speak perhaps the volume about the kind of defeat Israel is faced with right now, and it will be facing in the times to come.
Yeah, one very interesting aspect which we must not ignore in this is that this is perhaps the first major war Israel is fighting in Gaza and Palestinian territories, which is in the times of social media. And the propaganda tools, which were classical propaganda tools like the TV stations, the radio stations, and all that in the Western Hemisphere, those are not as effective in controlling the narrative as they used to be. So we are increasingly monitoring on the social media that many Jews living in United States, in UK, in other parts of Europe are condemning Israel, and they are distancing themselves from the Zionist ideology, and that they are saying that this is not us, this is not us, this is not what Torah teaches, and all that kind of pressure. Similarly, for many Christians in these countries, this is perhaps the first time that they are actually watching it live, that how Israeli forces behave, how they flout all international rules, how all human rights conventions, all war-related agreements which have been violated. Now you can see that even Pope had to today condemn Israel's action against the church as terrorism. It was called terrorism by the Pope. So you can understand that how large an influence Pope from Rome has on the Catholic population of Europe. So the world is looking at it, and there is obviously a huge cost in terms of reputation. And as I said, that the moral position of United States and Israel and United Kingdom and France has been immensely damaged during the last 2.5 months. I hope that now US intervenes more positively. We have seen that even some ministers from England have also pointed out that Israel is violating human rights, that Israel has to be more circumspect in using force. So we are hoping that this United Nations General Assembly resolution will more clearly and there will be a more pronounced expression of words will to stop Israel. As I am again and again saying that there is no military solution, there is no solution in the escalation of the war. There is only solution that is available to us is the moral pressure of the world, and that moral pressure of the world is should be more directed towards US, more diplomatic engagement with US, and in that I think our friends in the Gulf who have been always allies with US have to play a very positive role. Some of the countries are already playing a positive role, engaging Israel, engaging US to come to at least agree to a ceasefire so that all the stakeholders can sit back and negotiate a lasting peace.
Right, General Khan. Okay, so here is the scenario. If a ceasefire is reached immediately, let's say it's reached today, what about the damage and the destruction that has been caused over the course of last more than 2 months now? Let me quote certain stats which have been put forth by the United Nations. Now, the United Nations Satellite Analysis Agency says that 40,000 buildings have been destroyed in the Gaza Strip. Now, 18% of the Gaza's infrastructure has been destroyed. Likewise, the Doctors Without Borders in its statement has come to say that the water system isn't working anymore. It has completely collapsed. Likewise, the health system has collapsed over there. Human Rights Watch saying that Israel is deliberately depriving Palestinians of access to food, water, and other basic necessities. The use of hunger against the civilian population is a war crime, calling on the world leaders to act. War crime. Who is going to pay for the kind of proportion and the scale of damage and destruction that has happened already? Even a ceasefire is reached today. And is there any future accountability of the kind of war crimes that have been committed over the last 2 months?
I think as long as the United States supports Israel and defends it against whatever it does, Israel is not going to be held accountable. But what is more important is the role of the OIC and the Arab League. Unfortunately, I feel it is rather disappointing. They have, a lot of say. They wield so much of power, more than billion and a half near people of Muslims. I mean, on social media, you see talks about boycott of Israeli products and the products of some other countries who are supporting Israel. But I think practically nothing is happening. Nothing tangible has come out from the OIC meetings at many levels. Nothing tangible has come out from the Arab League. Again, that actually needs to change. That needs to change because the people of all those countries, they expect these organizations to play a much more effective role that could pressurize, the Security Council and its members in particular, at least to bring in a ceasefire there. And unless that is done, I think the people's trust on both the organization is going to be severely degraded. Also, I'd like to add that Hamas was essentially created by Israel itself, and it has been continuously funding it so that the Palestinian people could be divided between Gaza and the West Bank as they are. There's a separate government in West Bank and a separate in Raza. And similarly, there are, I think, 10 other, smaller Palestinian groups. So it is good that, they have now realized that effort has not, it helped them achieve some of their purposes. But now I think the people of Palestine must realize themselves to unite and to shun all their differences, to face Israel, as one state. And unless that is done, again, it will be very difficult then to maintain, that so-called two-state solutions about everyone is talking. Also, I think many U.S. uh, journalists have openly said that fighters from the United States, which comprise dual citizens who have voluntarily gone for fighting with the Israeli Defense Forces there. And, many of them are getting injured, some are getting killed. So, again, that is a pressure now which will actually come back on the US government and also on the people of the United States. And they will have to listen to those people who have gone there to fight there. And if they are caught or if they are injured, then their families are back home here in the United States. They are going to actually demand that there should be some accountability of the people who allowed them to go and fight outside the United States. So these are some of the big issues which I'm sure the US government and their politicians will very seriously consider before they take any decision in the UN Security Councils or through their interactions that is going on with the Middle Eastern leaders.
Right, Mr. Zafar, now the kind of damage and the destruction that has already taken place. Let's say the ceasefire is reached today. Who is going to be responsible for the kind of destruction or the damage that has already been inflicted to the Gaza Strip?
Well, I think once the ceasefire is sort of agreed and there is cessation of hostilities between both sides, cessation of hostilities from Israel, because the other side does not have much option right now. After that, the first task will be, of course, restoring basic services. And for that, United Nations, different organizations within the United Nations system will be responsible, and the world will have to provide funding for that. This will be a long, slow process. Nothing is going to be rebuilt overnight, but the first thing is to restore medical supplies, restore some hospitals, restore water system, deliver food in the area, because as pointed out by many observers, is that right now even hunger is being used as a weapon in Gaza, because one of the agenda of Israel's aggression is to almost remove everyone from Gaza out of the strip, so and remodel it or whatever they want to do.
That is clearly a genocide, right?
That's
so
genocide,
is there going to be any sort of an accountability in times to come?
It pains me to say
this?
that no. It pains me to say that no, because all the systems which are utilized by the Committee of the Nations for such actions are unfortunately controlled by United States, and United States is not interested in in imposing anything on Israel.
Conclusively, you are saying that there is not.
It pains me to say that.
The accountability doesn't stand a chance in times to come.
Yeah, but right, so the most we can hope for right now is cessation of hostilities and aggression by
So accountability
Israel.
On what level? On the national level or on a personal level? Because if it was because of the individual approach of Benjamin Netanyahu, shouldn't he be had accountability? Because kind of.
But the question is, what are the mechanisms
because
available
the statement from the opposition leader here, Lapid, has also come. He has also called on the Prime Minister to resign.
Yeah.
right? So if the voices from within are coming, so do we understand that it's what has been carried out over the last 2 months was not necessarily a national agenda, rather it was an individual agenda for which the nation...
I doubt that, because the way Israeli forces have behaved, the way most of their population has behaved, the content coming out of Israel itself, that shows that the Israeli nation itself has become sort of, as a nation they have become aggressors. They have taken their victimhood narrative too far, and in that victimhood narrative, they justify almost everything which their security forces inflict upon others. So it is a disappointing situation, but I don't see that even if tomorrow Netanyahu loses government, and that may be the maximum.
But the policy is not going to change.
Policy of Israel is not going to change. It has been consistent over last many decades. You go to the times of Golda Meir, Isaac Rabin, whoever.
Mr. Aniq Zafar happens to be an analyst. Thank you very much for joining us in the studio today. We really appreciate that. On Skype, we were joined by Lieutenant General Raza. Please go ahead.
Yes,
please go ahead.
I wanted to say, I missed the answer to your question of the reconstruction of Gaza. I think all the affluent countries from the OIC, particularly in the Middle East, must start pledging money for the reconstruction of Gaza. That is the least that they can do. Whether they have to do it directly or through the auspices of the UN, they both can be considered together.
Right. Lieutenant General retired Raza Mohammed Khan, former president of the National Defense University. Thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.